happiness, survival, self-worth. These are things that we all struggle with at one time or another, but what are they? Where do they come from? And how do we determine them? And why, you may ask, in the year 2025, it's important for us to take a look at what those things are and what they mean to us as a species. Well, let's go a little bit deeper. Let's talk about that. What's going on, everybody? My name is J. Fitzpatrick Malden, and I am an author of character-driven, hard science fiction and fantasy, most recently of the Foundry universe. And in this video, I want to go through a bit of a deeper topic than I would in some of my videos. And I know that I talk about, we're going to say, all things books and storytelling, but this channel is also about the human experience, what it means to be human, the good, the bad, the ugly. And today, I want to talk about happiness, self-worth, and survival, because I think these are some very important topics that I've been thinking about a lot lately, given that we are currently in an era where all of that is being upended by technological changes, by cultural changes, and by societal changes. So today's video it's going to be a little bit different than some of my others because it is a bit scripted. And so if I'm looking off camera reading, it is mainly because I've put my thoughts down on paper, because thoughts like this, I tend to ramble, and then sometimes my references end up in odd places, and I don't want to get this one wrong. Or as I'm recording this video, let's just say, getting here to record this evening was a challenge. Speaking of things not always being easy in life, tonight's challenge was the 3-year-old everything. Her tummy hurts, which we're not sure if it is or not. She didn't want to get in the bath, but then ended up in the bath, wanted to use the potty, but didn't want to use the potty, was afraid of everything. It was just one of those evenings where any excuse, I don't know if they're excuses or reason or whatever, got in the way. And that kind of stuff can really mess up your calm and your energy. So when I say that having kids is challenging and then also amazing and rewarding, it is. It is the most challenging duty, honor, responsibility I've ever had. And I absolutely love my kids. And some days I don't know if I'm enough. And I think every parent thinks that from time to time. So this here has the potential to be one of my most controversial videos I've made so far, and I have no intention of it being so. It's just that's kind of how the nature of things are these days, let's be honest. It's often hard for us to divest ourselves and our worldview in light of another, given the conditioning that we've received over the course of our life. And so it is 100% natural for us to want to fight ideas that don't feel comfortable or challenge our worldview, because as hunter-gatherers, as human beings, new typically means dangerous, and it usually challenges our way of life, be that good or be that bad. And so, as strange as this may be, I think happiness itself is actually an affront to the status quo, which I believe thrives on keeping all of us imbalanced. But I believe that happiness itself is actually easier for us to achieve than we give credit. And the metrics by which we measure happiness and we measure success in the 21st century, I think is honestly broken. And so I want to go through a little bit of what that looks like. And this feeds into some of the philosophy and some of the ideas that are in some of my novels revolving around worldview and revolving around how people treat one another. And so to understand how we got to where we are, I think first we have to look back in time. We have to take a objective and academic view of our economic systems and how they created the world that we're currently in to be able to understand why we feel a lot of the ways that we often feel. Okay, so keeping things simple, let's talk about two sides of the capitalist system we currently live under in most of the world today. Now, I'm not here to argue anything like capitalism is wrong and that it destroyed everything and all of that. Look, you can choose whatever worldview you want in that. I'm not here to actually tell you what to believe at all. I'm just going through history, and we're going to talk about some of the ways that we got to where we are. And so, in general, capitalism has created a lot of wealth in the world, though we know that it is imbalanced because of the type of system that it is. And that imbalance has become a bit more weighted one direction than the other as time has gone on. Now, a lot of that has to do with these two basic ideas of capitalism. And so let's start first with Keynesian economics, which are what dominated around the Great Depression era and World War II all the way up until the 1970s. Now, Keynesian economics were the idea that basically it would take government intervention to be able to control some of the checks and balances in our market, because having an unregulated market allowed for natural imbalances to occur as people took advantage of the market, such as the stock market crash and some other events in our history. And so you have to put it in the mindset of someone living that at the time that had gone through the Great Depression or World War II. Things were pretty bad for a while. People were afraid. They didn't know what to do to be able to make ends meet. And ultimately, it felt good to know that, hey, we've got somebody looking over our shoulder to keep the businesses in check. Now, generally speaking, if you go back and look at a lot of businesses during that time period, yes, you still had rich people that made tons of money and a disproportionate amount of money. Yes, totally get it. That's going to be the same throughout all of history, even in other economic systems, we'll just say that. However, there was more of a mindset of that business was there to serve the community. It was there to be a place that would be an anchor for the community for people to go work, and you would actually built cities around businesses. However, as we got out of the Great Depression and we moved into a boom era, we had the baby boomers and everything, the economy started to lag a little bit. The growth started to slow off, and the middle class we had began to shrink a little bit. And there were a lot of concerns in that space. And so people started to take a look at the long-term effects in this. They started worrying about what this might mean for the stock market. And then we had events like the oil bust that ended up causing tons of issues in our economy in the 1970s. And I just want to reiterate again, sure, the rich made tons of money during that time period. Sure, the rich make tons of money now, guys. There's always going to be opportunities out there. There's always going to be business people that are going to find a way to turn $1 into $1 million. This is always going to happen. This is the way history happens. Human beings are like this. However, during that time period, you had more of an 80-20 balance. And if you go back in history, when there is more of an 80-20 balance of the 20% being the most well-off, the 80% being the less well-off, so your middle class or your lower class, there tends to be a lot less social unrest, at least when it comes economically. And you can do some reading up on this. I think it's worth exploring and worth enriching yourself. And yes, I said read books for research. Don't just grab random podcast number 7. Don't listen to random dude like me. Go actually find some books on it. An interesting book if you want to go really far back and learn a lot about economics and kind of the processes going even further back than this would be A Wealth of Nations, which is a very, very, very dense novel, reference book, guide, essay. I don't know how you want to say it, but it is basically what a lot of the capitalist economic systems are built on today. And there's some very fascinating things in that about people and money and labor. I also learned from that book that that corn used to be the kind of universal term for wheat. I didn't know that until reading that, but it's fascinating. So here we are now in the 1970s. Like I said, we had the oil shock or the oil bust, and Keynesian ideas started to fall out of favor because we ended up in a new space in the economy where they included ideas like stagflation, which is where things were getting more expensive, but yet people weren't working, and this caused all kinds of issues. You'll hear a lot of people talk about the oil lines where they had to sit for hours and they were only able to get so much gas, and This was before I was born. I don't know what this was like to live through, but I imagine it was pretty scary. And so the economy was tanking, things weren't going great, and a new way of thinking started to come into effect that, of course, big business was super excited about. And so Friedman came along and he wrote a paper for the New York Times, or rather an essay for the New York Times, which kind of reframed the way that business was supposed to show up and that capitalism was supposed to show up. And that was that the idea that the social responsibility of a business was to make profits. Now, I'm not saying that the paper itself said profit at all costs. However, as regulations began to loosen, as we ended up with things like Reaganomics later on and the trickle-down ideas, we ended up with a lot of deregulated space in business and ideas that let's not worry about the workers or the long-term effects as much as let's just focus on the short-term gains so that we can ensure that our shareholders make more money next year than they did this year. In Simon Sinek's amazing book, it's called The Infinite Game. It's about business and, running a sustainable business and being a great leader. In that book, he talks about this idea he calls shareholder supremacy, which is basically that these shareholders determine everything that the business does. And so think you're not going to meet the earnings report for the quarter? No problem, just fire a bunch of people. Let's reduce the amount of expenses we have on our salaries, and all of a sudden we're a profitable business. However, oftentimes in mass layoffs like that, you end up firing a lot of the talent, you end up ruining the culture, and you really end up causing a lot of issues that take years for a business to recover, if ever. And I know that if you're like me, you were born in the 80s, you probably don't remember this, but actually inflation during the 1980s was far worse than it has been post-COVID. Post-COVID, I want to say the highest it got was in the 7% range, but in the 1980s, it got as high as 15%. And as a result, they ended up having to raise interest rates to over 18% to be able to slow down demand such that they could start to see inflation tick its way down. Crazy. Can't imagine doing it in this day and time. However, it was something that they had to do, and I guess it worked because eventually they did get inflation down to that 2-3% mark that they like to keep it at. And might I add, guys, I'm no economist. Yes, I work in a business setting for my primary career. I know a decent amount about the economy, but I'm not an economist. We're glazing over some of these things, and if you want to go deeper, I would listen to someone who is an economist for a living on this to learn more. Like I said, random podcast bro number 17 is not who you should be getting your economic advice from. Always check people's credentials. And again, everything is bias. I just want to remind you of that on anything we do. Everything is bias. So nothing is clear cut. And so here we are in 2025. The middle class hasn't really kept pace with inflation. So that means we've had a shrinking middle class. And then with this kind of technocrat class that has come up with these tech bros and these platforms, including this one right here, that have come about, you have these ultra rich people that now have a disproportionate amount of the wealth. So instead of the 80-20 we were talking about, this is where the whole 99-1% comes from, which is a valid concern. Now, am I saying that we should just chop up their wealth and hand it to everybody? And none of that is what I am saying at all. I am just saying that when there are certain imbalances in the economy, this often leads to social unrest. It leads to bad feelings. It leads to people doing some pretty extreme things. And it also creates opportunities for politicians and other people to be able to take advantage of this animosity in whichever way they feel benefits them the most. And we're back. My computer decided to just restart, and Windows decided to do something weird, and then it had to restart like 6 times. I get so tired of Windows randomly doing updates. It drives me bonkers. This night is frustrating the heck out of me. I'm just being real here. Sometimes everything goes according to plan. Sometimes it doesn't. And now I've got things bugging all over the place on this, and it's not that anything's wrong with my computer. I set things up correctly ahead of time, and then now there we go. That should fix that. Okay, so where are we? I'm a science fiction writer. Why are we talking about all these things? Why are we just talking about spaceships and science? Guys, it's all related. Society is another way to engineer. Anything that you build when it comes to a system, it has a lot of different considerations. So you can look at a society like a machine, and many science fiction writers, I mean, look at Roddenberry, predominantly. I mean, he spent his entire career with Star Trek trying to imagine a better life for humanity beyond the same bullshit that we experience day in and day out. And so things might not work out exactly the way that they are or the way that he imagined them. But you know what? There's nothing wrong with thinking that the world can be a better place, not just another dumpster fire for the next 10,000 years. And I'm always going to look on the bright side. I'm always going to look for a means for us to work within this nature that we have and yet do better than our nature. Okay, so given the above economic journey, we have some challenges. Oftentimes, the worth of a human being is basically equated to their net worth. That is, the amount of money they earn equals the amount of money they're worth. And so we end up on this weird journey of how can we acquire the most amount of wealth in our lifetime such that we have worth when we die. And it's a fool's errand. And for those who don't know what net worth is, it basically means sell all the stuff you have, pay off all your debts, what money you have left. And so that is a very simplified explanation. Most of you, if you actually did the math, you are probably at a negative net worth. I know the first time I calculated my net worth because of the role I was in my job, it was something we were talking about. It was like negative $38,000. And once I was able to put my finger on that and go, ooh, I don't like that at all, we were able to make some changes. I grew as a person and in my career and all that kind of stuff, and we've since changed that. However, many people don't even know that. And when you have a system who only sees you as a number and you are just another piece on a board, then if you have a negative net worth, which they know these things, you are seen as less, and you are seen as less valuable. And the reality of it is that is utter crap, in my opinion. Hear me on this. The value of who you are as a human being is not tied to your net worth. It is not tied to your income. It is how you show up in your community. It is how you make best use of the life that is given you. It is how you use your unique skills and perspective to be able to make the world, make everyone you come in contact a little bit better. And that right there is so much harder to quantify in this weird little money game that we've created, which, by the way, is a complete hallucination. And even the richest of the world, if tomorrow everything fell apart and the dollar was worth nothing, they would be flat broke. It's all just a really weird game that we play that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, especially going here into the future. Now let's simplify what's going on. Let's play the doomsday scenario. AI is coming for our jobs. Let's say that it takes 40% of the jobs in the economy and either leaves us completely laid off, or you have people that are in an underemployment status and the government fudges the numbers to say that we're creating jobs, but really basically you're just creating half jobs as far as income. Let's say that situation happens. One side of that, people are broke. There ends up being a bunch of social unrest. You end up with a larger wealth gap between the wealthy and the poor. Things get really bad. I don't like that scenario. It's the one that keeps me up at night sometimes. But let's look at scenario number 2. And this is more in line with finding happiness in life, which, by the way, Harvard did a study several years ago. And what they determined is there was a direct correlation to the amount of happiness people reported having and the amount of money they made up to a certain point where it just completely leveled off. At the time that this study came out, and I'll be sure to link it, it was about $150,000 a year meant peak happiness for most people. Yeah, funny, right? Probably more like 200,000 now. However, after that point, people didn't get any happier. So you can't say that you're Elon Musk, you're Bezos, you're Bill Gates, or any of those are millions of times happier than I am. I am an incredibly happy person. I feel wealthy. I've got a wonderful family. I've got kids that challenge me and make me curious and full of wonder. I have a wife who has stuck with me through thick and thin. I have a job and a role where I get to pour back into people and help them live better lives and make an income to where I can support my family and do some cool things. I consider myself to be an incredibly wealthy person, and although fun and cool things could happen in my life, am I at peak happiness? I don't know, but I certainly know that earning 10 times as much isn't going to make me 10 times as happy as I am right now. And so let's focus on that second scenario I was saying. What if 40% of the jobs disappear, or we all start making 40% less? Sounds pretty scary, unless certain things are met. I think one of the solutions that we can have in our economic system would be to make it more robust in the sense that we could give people a little bit more personal, not autonomy, but personal resilience in their residence. So let's say, for instance, you had a way where you could develop a technology such that someone could farm 30 to 40% of the calories that they needed on a daily basis using these AIs that we are being forced to kind of use, that's being shoved down our throat. Might as well get some benefit out of it. It tells us exactly how to use the least amount of water, the least amount of materials, or whatever, so that we can get the highest crop yields, and a layman like me who has a black thumb can grow whatever inside of his house and end up bringing in food on a regular basis. That would reduce stress on our overall agricultural system, on our economic system, and so on. Second, let's say that we had figured out some new way to do solar panels that had to do with, let's say, some sort of plant-based photosynthetic. It didn't use rare earth metals, and we were able to get, instead of an efficiency of 30% on our solar panels, 35% max, we were able to get 80 or 90%. Well, you may not replace the entire grid with this method, but you could absolutely create the supplemental energy you need to handle things like your freezer, your fridge, making sure that in the hottest months of the year that you've got heat, in the coldest months of the winter that you have, or rather in the hottest months of the year you have air conditioning, the coldest months you have heat, and so on and so on. And then so we've got power covered, we've got food covered, and then water. What if we made it mandatory as part of city codes that we're adding basically water collection units instead of gutters just creating runoff? What if they at least created the non-potable water we needed for our house, like for our showers or our toilets? I know none of these solutions are perfect. I know none of these solutions are easy. And I know that there's a lot of legal reasons for some of them not to be implemented. The water capture thing, actually go look it up. It's illegal in a lot of cities to capture water on your property. Don't really understand the whole thing about that. But anyway, I haven't done enough research. Don't listen to me. And there are challenges there, but can we find solutions? Yes. Because when we cover people's needs, it gives them the opportunity to be happy. And when people are happy, there tends to be less social unrest, and then we end up having a better and more equitable society. Because it's not as easy for special interests to get out there and pit us against each other when everybody's kind of having a good time. And in 2025, we have the resources, we have the ability. It's just really a matter of the will and the direction to be able to make this a better place. I'm not the guy with all the solutions. I'm not going to tell you how to go out and do it. I'm not going to say that this political party or that political party is going to be able to fix it. I honestly don't know if anybody in leadership can fix it right now. However, I do know that we are just a few technological advances away from humanity living better if we so choose to do so. And so I just want to say, kind of closing out, that happiness for me is not just about getting what you want, but rather it's about wanting what you have. People don't even get the opportunity to explore these ideas, though, if they're always struggling, if they're always trying to find ways to make ends meet, and if they're living under a system where basically if you're not rich, you don't have a ton of net worth, that you are seen as boot on the bottom, or rather dirt on the bottom of somebody's boot. That is an unfortunate place that we have reached in our society. Honestly, it's probably been in about every society ever. However, I feel like we're in a day and age where we can be aware of that. Having wealth is not a zero-sum game. And many of the people that I've come across in my life that have immense amount of wealth, or conversations I've had in other spaces with wealthy people, I kind of have come to understand that I think most people don't acquire wealth out of, or rather, let me say, their greed is not purely based on the acquisition of pleasure. It is oftentimes a rejection of the dangers of life, and honestly, it's their fears coming to the surface. They believe that by having all the wealth in this zero-sum game, that maybe, just maybe, they can hedge their bets enough that suffering will not reach them. And the truth is, suffering comes for us all. And when we work together to fix the problems in the world, there tends to be less suffering. But when we build borders around our homes, when we only become enamored with what happens to me, then that's where we end up all suffering together, and that's a terrible place to be. So am I saying don't go make a ton of money? Am I being the morality police? Again, I've tried to go back and over again in this video. I am not trying to tell you how to live your life. What I am saying is happiness is a very complicated and personal thing. But one thing I do know is that people do not have the things they need to survive, then oftentimes they do not even get to pursue that happiness. So here we are in 2025, and me in my particular role, me in my life, the best that I can do is to help other people navigate an imperfect system in an imperfect world so that they can have a little bit of imperfect happiness and hopefully live a really good life. Guys, happiness is a choice. And it's one that we make every single day. But I often find that when you turn things off, you reduce the noise around you, and you just listen to yourself, listen to your heart, you might find that you already have the ingredients you need to be happy in your life, even if everything else is kind of a dumpster fire. And just like Frodo in Gandalf's conversation from The Lord of the Rings, Frodo wished that he had not been born to these times, but Gandalf replied that the only thing that we can do is to make the best of the time that we are given. And so I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to do everything I can to wake up every day and choose happiness and choose kindness. And I'm going to turn off the noise as much as possible. I'm going to go talk to some real people. And that includes people just like you. So until next time, safe journeys, Cosmic Traveler. Stay safe out there.